And I've often thought about this, and I think the one thing you can't avoid that comes down to is there is some kind of intrinsic feeling that remains, that whereas the Nazi regime gets it wrong for horrible and the worst possible reasons, somehow every single time that the communists had control of a country and turned it into dust, it was somehow the product of good intention.
Yeah, well, there's a universalism about the communist ethos that definitely isn't there on the Nazi side, because the Nazi claim is, this is for us and definitely not for you. And so the exclusionary principle is built right into the beginning, where right at the beginning. Whereas on the communist side, at least in principle, if not in reality,
your Munk debate in Canada recently, you got into a fascinating subject, which I wanted to turn to, which is the question of if we are in agreement on where the right goes wrong, racial difference being made the sole and most important thing, exacerbation of such differences, and so on. The vertiginous fall that we can all identify that can happen to the extremes of the right. If we identify that, you, I think, quite rightly said to your debate opponents there, where is it that the left goes wrong? And rather like your conversation with the panel on Bill Maher about Trump voters, absolutely nobody was able to even understand what you were starting to get at, and nobody picked you up on it. So I wanted
that was a question that just went nowhere.
Just evaporated. And it seems to me that, and obviously we're speaking in London, we've had massive changes on the political left in this country in the last 2 years. This question of where the left goes wrong seems to me
a crucial question.
Absolutely vital.
It's absolutely crucial. Yeah, and it's a question that intellectuals in particular, I would say, are at terrible fault for not addressing over the last virtually 100 years. Because the intellectuals, roughly speaking, have been complicit in failure to define the excesses of the left.
Why is that?
Well, I think it's partly because intellectuals tend to be left-leaning. So the best predictor for leaning left is a trait called openness, which is associated to some degree with cognitive ability, but more importantly with creativity. And so left-leaning people don't like boundaries between things, and which is also why I think the left-leaning people can't draw boundaries within their own domain. They don't like borders, well, as we can certainly tell. I mean, they'd rather have the borders open. Well, why? Because the more open the borders are between things, the more opportunity there is for information flow. And left-leaning open people like information flow. They think, well, the net benefit of free information flow is positive. It's like, fair enough. But that doesn't mean that there should be no barriers between things, which is the conservative perspective. And because many of the forms of information, it's not only information that flows across open borders, it's all sorts of things that flow across open borders. And so, and things get muddy and confused if there's no conceptual differences between people. And so there's an argument between the right and the left about where the borders should be and how porous they should be. And that's an argument that always has to occur. The problem on the left is that clearly, absolutely, indisputably,
Hi, Frank Jordan.
Can go too far, and the evidence for that is the catastrophe, like the catastrophe of Auschwitz, the catastrophe of the Nazis. All that death and suffering is evidence of wrong, which is accepted by the left. Then equal evidence exists that can happen on the left. In fact, perhaps even more evidence. And if you don't think the evidence is credible, then there's something wrong with you.
There's something that's gone wrong from the 20th century and is still going wrong on this. I think I've said to you before that there seems to be this presumption still, if this is a political center, that if you take one step to the political right, say by wanting to have lower taxes, that makes you right-wing. And beyond that, it's just a vertiginous hurtle down to Nazism. It's lower taxes, alt-right Nazism.
Yeah.
And on the left of the spectrum, it's possible to step left, be on the left, run left, keep running, and the end of the running never includes the gulag.
Never. Not in the education systems either. No one knows about it. when my students at the University of Toronto, the first time they hear about what happened in the Soviet Union is in my personality class. It's like, well, what the hell? First of all, really in a personality class? I mean, the reason I bring it up is because Solzhenitsyn drew an existential link between the failure of the individual psyche and the propensity for people to engage in the great lie and the creation of these totalitarian states. So I view it as an extension of existential psychology and philosophy, and that's how I slot it into my classes. But the students otherwise don't know. It's like, oh, really? We had 100 million corpses pile up and damn near put the entire planet to the torch because of the tension between the West and the radical left. And, well, we're just going to sweep that under the rug like it never happened. It's like, well, what? Okay, so then it's very easy to be extremely annoyed about this and even morally outraged, and it's hard to avoid the temptation. But there is actually...
Well, Jordan Peterson, they're trying to be, I think, a little politically correct with what the left tries to do in terms of hide its horrors, sweep them under the rug, obfuscate, don't talk about it. Don't talk about what happened with communism, with socialism. Don't talk about what happened with Mao in China. Don't talk about, what happened with Stalin in Russia. Whitewash everything. But everything on the right, put it out there full bore in neon lights. Slavery, imperialism, colonialism, all land grabs, just taking the massive wealth from every other place and just using it for themselves to establish the West domination, right? That's all you always hear. And then Douglas Peterson, and then Douglas talking about that line that, if you're conservative and you're at center and you step one thing to the right, no matter what that is, and he used the word taxes, but you could say anything to the right that you put inside there. The next step that you take, boom, alt-right, white supremacists. And they do this with everybody. Diversity of thought? No. Diversity of opinion? No. And that happens so often to minorities within the conservative movement. Blacks. As soon as you go off the plantation, you know what? You're a white supremacist. I'm a white supremacist. How white do I look to you guys? Well, there is some white here, obviously. And I've got some other places on my body that are pretty white. Okay? Not going to show you today. We'll leave that for another show. But I'm just saying, okay? But it's not groupthink. I don't slot into the leftist definition of where they think I should be at politically or socially or socially or economically. That's the difference here. But like he was saying, but on the left, because they control everything. They control the media. They control the Google networks. They control the alphabet, media establishment. They control academia at the colleges and universities with like 99.99% of all the professors and teachers out there, leaning left. So when this thing happens, that's exactly what you're going to get. And that's why we have to continue to fight it. And we are fighting it through people like Peterson and Murray and Weinstein and Rogan and Knowles and Walsh and, you name all the others that are out there. So many. But this is what we have to fight with every single time you get into a conversation. And the left, with their linguistics, is very good at using language to put people into certain categories and to categorize them. And we've just got to learn that lingo and to literally throw it right back in their faces. Anyways, let's get back to more of the conversation between Douglas Peterson and Douglas Murray, and we'll do so. That's what we have on tap for you today, folks. You're watching the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasser, where I give you my political prescription from my political perspective of what happens when these great minds like Peterson and Murray collide with social media, academia, religion, politics, culture, government, policies. They all come crashing together. Let's get more of the conversation right now.
Problem here, I think, and it's one that the right is perhaps just as incapable of solving. And this is the issue that you brought up. It's like, okay, exactly when do things go too far on the left? And the answer is, we don't know. And it might be because there isn't a single issue on the left that marks out the degeneration into pathological ideology, like claims of racial difference that support the notion of superiority do on the right. So maybe it's a pathological combination of 5 good ideas, something like that. Like, I believe now that there's a nexus of ideas that mark out the left as too extreme. Diversity, inclusivity, equity, it's kind of like a mantra. White privilege, that's not a phrase that I'm very fond of. And claims of, and exaggerated claims of systemic racism. It's something like that. So, as well as what would you call the verbiage around the oppressive patriarchy. Right. Jesus, that's a complicated box, and there's an interaction between all those terms because, well, you can make a case for diversity. Like, should all elementary school teachers be women? Well, perhaps not. Should all nurses be women? Perhaps not. Should all plumbers be men? Well, perhaps not. Like, you might.
Do you only have fairness when you have more female engineers?
Yes. Well, and to what if we're going to have a society where men and women are competing on a roughly equal basis? Do we want a situation where all the engineers are men? Perhaps not. And I mean, I don't know the answer to these questions because because choice matters. So each of these individual leftist propositions has a domain of reasonableness about it. And then it goes too far. And then the aggregation of them also goes too far, but we can't tell when.
And what makes it harder, it seems to me, is the issue of motive. That, the late Robert Conquest, as you know, one of the great historians of the nightmare that happened in Russia in the 20th century, was once asked late in life about this issue of the intrinsic evil of the 2 totalitarianisms of the 20th century. And I remember even Conquest found it hard to put his finger on it, but said, in some way the Nazis do seem worse. Yeah. And I've often thought about this, and I think the one thing you can't avoid that comes down to is there is some kind of intrinsic feeling that remains, that whereas the Nazi regime gets it wrong for horrible and the worst possible reasons, somehow every single time that the communists had control of a country and turned it into dust, it was somehow the product of good intention.
Yeah, well, there's a universalism about the communist ethos that definitely isn't there on the Nazi side, because the Nazi claim is, this is for us and definitely not for you. And so the exclusionary principle is built right into the beginning, right at the beginning. Whereas on the communist side, at least in principle, if not in reality, the coming utopia was for everyone. And there was the song of the brotherhood of man, and the idea that people could be included regardless of their origin. So that seems like part of it, is that there's an evil built into the principle itself that the Nazis that ran with, that is absent with the communists. But the truth of the matter is, to some degree, that it didn't matter because the tally of bodies was equivalent on both sides of the equation. And so even if there's the lack of a certain toxic principle at the outset of the communist doctrine, it doesn't make it one whit less catastrophic. And it might even be worse in some sense because you can't put your finger on it. Now, my sense is that a line crossed on the left is equality of outcome. And it's part of the identity politics pathology. There's something wrong with, first of all, there's something wrong with construing the world as if your group identity is paramount. That's bad. That's a non-starter. Now, it's not so easy to exactly say why.
Funnily enough, of course, that is being pushed.
Wow. Just great conversation. Just unbelievably profound statements being made. And the thing that I latched onto was this fact that Nazism, communism, socialism, Nazism, killed 6 million Jews plus, who knows how many other ethnic, peoples. But somehow, as Douglas Murray sort of pointed out, that seems to be worse because it was Nazism. And that even though communism and socialism killed over 100 million people in the last 100 years, and that anywhere that communism or socialism has been tried, it's literally brought those nation states, those civilizations, and just absolutely obliterated them. Still, it sort of gets a pass by the left. Why? Because it wanted to do good. Communism and socialism were supposed to equalize it for everybody. It was the nirvana of society, something that you attain. So like where religious people say you're trying to attain heaven. Well, what is that? Well, it's described in the various scriptures, and other people will describe it for you. And you have to try to, and that's where you attain. And atheists say there's nothing like that. So why do you even try to go for it? There's nothing good in heaven. There doesn't exist. There's no place like heaven or hell. That's what you're hearing from the agnostics and the atheists. And from the left, they always are trying to push this notion and try to sweep it under the rug. You know, give communism a pass for the deaths that it created, the misery that it created for the people that, that lived under the totalitarian rule of those people that were in power under socialism and communist dictatorships. Forget that stuff. The people died, people suffered, they didn't have enough food. But you know what? They were trying to make it an equal society. They were trying to give everybody the same chance. The lowest person is as equal as the highest dictator. That's what they were trying to do. Fascinating discussion. Really, really great stuff, folks. You've been watching the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasser. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. If we've earned that subscription, check off the box, hit that subscription button, like, share, and follow us. You all know what to do. Take a look at our video links. They're here and below. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.